I'm Lynn Penke-Valdez with Otter County. Super excited to let them introduce themselves, but I want to point out, and we didn't know this in our planning, and I think all of us were just really excited to learn that we have today, speaking as experts, a military veteran, a military spouse, and a child of a military member. So we've got 3 different perspectives, and I'm really excited to hear from them how their lived experience has influenced how they work with veterans in the workforce. All right, with that, I'll let you guys introduce yourself.
Perfect. I'm Melissa Johnson. I'm standing because I'm presenting this afternoon, excuse me. It's been a long day already. I am the Director of Veteran Services for Cardinal Consulting Solutions. You saw Amy Johnson downstairs with CCS at the Youth Workforce Navigation table. I am a 20-year military spouse. I have been helping veterans, military families in some capacity for more than 10 years. And I'm really happy to be here today bringing military into the DEI conversations because I think that's important.
Hi, my name excuse me, is Jody Franklin, sorry. And I am the daughter of a naval aviator. I am coming from Northern Contours. I'm in human resources there, and so I'll be giving you some perspective as far as employers and also a child of a naval officer.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Olson, and I'm the County Veteran Service Officer for Otter County. Prior to that, I did work private sector, and I was a traditional guardsman for a number of years. After my first deployment, I became an active duty member with the National Guard, and I did another 20 plus years doing that. And since then, I've been doing about 3 years now with the county. So looking forward to talking to you and answering any questions you may have.
All right, well, here we go. I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes, talk a little bit about why transitioning out of the military is difficult, whether you're a veteran, a military child, or a military spouse like myself. My husband is active duty. He is still in Texas. My children and I moved back here in August so that my oldest, who is a senior this year, could start her senior year in the same school. My husband will be transitioning in December. So. As I said, I am Melissa Johnson. I am the Director of Veteran Services. What I do with Cardinal Consulting Solutions is train companies how to hire from the military community. I teach you about military culture. We talk about overcoming the hurdles of the language barrier, where to find service members, and then once you go through that training, we transition into setting up a veteran employee resource group, okay? Before I get started though, does anyone know October 26th is National Day of the Deployed? So I'm wearing a yellow ribbon. I think Jody has one on. A few of the ladies downstairs had some on as well. You guys are welcome to grab a yellow ribbon before you leave, and that is to just show your support for anyone who is deployed around the country or world. I personally know that the Minnesota National Guard has a mobilized unit right now. And so I would venture to guess that many of us know someone who is currently deployed. And then next, if you are a veteran, raise your hand. Thank you guys for your service, for your dedicated service to our country. And if you're a military spouse, or were a military spouse, or are a military child, or a military child currently, obviously that's not going to happen, but thank you for your sacrifices over the years supporting your service member. So let's get started. We're going to talk today about the challenges the military community faces when transitioning out of the military and into the civilian world. There are many obstacles in transition, not only deciding where to live, but finding schools, finding housing, child care. We all talked about that downstairs. I myself have struggled with child care issues since moving back home. And then finally, employment. And finally, employment. So the invisible hurdle is that though the service member has resources to help with their resume, and I know Jim will probably talk about some of those resources as well, there's a transition assistant program that you go through when you get out of the military. And though those things are in place, one of the hurdles that they don't know they're about to come across is that the civilian workforce doesn't understand them. They're about to be misunderstood by that brand new lifestyle, okay? So either their knowledge, skills, and abilities won't be translated properly to land the job they're hoping to get, which is another workforce hurdle, or they won't be able to effectively communicate to a potential employer what they accomplished in the military, excuse me. So language barrier. Like other industries, healthcare being one of them, I was in a conversation with a healthcare worker the other day. She said many things I didn't understand, and now I am familiar with moving into the civilian world using acronyms and things like that people don't understand. But military has its own jargon, if you will. Military speak, some people call it. We speak in acronyms, abbreviations. I think, can I just, yeah. I'm just going to turn this off. I'm so sorry.
This one's on.
Maybe that'll be less distracting, sorry. Okay, so where was I in my notes here? Oh yes, military jargon. Additionally, each branch has its own language. So if you are in the Army, an acronym might be something completely different in the Navy. And then likewise, in the Army, one acronym might mean something different from one job to the next. I'll give you one example. RI in the infantry world would mean Ranger Instructor. But RI in the recruiting world would mean recruiting impropriety, which would be a big no-no. And those are two very vastly different acronyms, but you're in the same setting, okay? So why should we learn some military jargon? Why is that important? We want to know what the person sitting across from us in an interview is talking about, at least a little bit. We're not going to understand everything. And I don't think it's our job to understand everything, but if we can pick up those pieces of what might be important to us when hiring from the military community, that interview might be a little bit more successful for us. So today I'm going to discuss with you how to get over the language barriers when interviewing a reservist, a guardsman, transitioning service member, or veteran if they're using military speak. So I want to walk you through a situation you might encounter. The soldier that is in this video is transitioning from active duty to retirement in rural Minnesota. So you're going to see firsthand what this veteran might say when you ask about military service in an interview.
Good morning, I'm First Sergeant Aaron Dobbs.
It's nice to meet you, Aaron. I'm Melissa. Tell me a little bit about your military service.
Well, my MOS is a 15 Zulu with a 15 Delta feeder. I'm a graduate of VLC, ALC, SLC, MLC, and the SMC. Additionally, I'm certified in MRT, EO, SHARP, and MFT. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Aviation Safety and my FCC and FAA certifications. I have extensive experience in aviation maintenance and NDI across the United States and the world, having PCS 6 times and deployed 5 times to combat zones. I have served as a TL, an SL, a TI, SGO, PSG, a PCNCOSC, and a first sergeant in both an AMC and an ASC. I have maintenance experience in the Army Humvee and LMTV, as well as 5 MBS aircrafts, the H-64, UH-60, CH-47, UH-1, and OH-58. As a first sergeant, I'm responsible for the health, welfare, training, safety, and discipline of 120 officers, NCOs, soldiers, and their families, as well as the service and upkeep of $100 million worth of Army systems and equipment.
Wow, who wants to hire him?
Good morning, I'm First Sergeant Aaron Dobbs.
Hold on, there we go. So I lived this life. I understood 100% of that. Did you understand any of it? Is there anything you could pick out that you were like, oh yeah, I understood what that meant? So every acronym he mentions is on this screen right here, so maybe there's something you might be able to pick out and understand. Oh yeah, I get it, I know what he said. It is distracting when you're sitting in an interview across from someone and you don't know what they're saying. Then you lose focus as an interviewer and you lack confidence moving forward. Now, is it okay to say, Could you explain that a little bit more? Absolutely. And I would expect you to do that, not knowing anything about the military community. However, everyone might not know how to do that because all they know for the past however many years is how to speak military, okay? So I kindly asked this service member to translate what he was saying into civilian terms. So we're going to hear right now what he had to say in civilian terms, and maybe some of this will sound familiar to you.
Good morning, I'm Aaron Dobbs.
Good morning, Aaron. It's nice to meet you. I'm Melissa. Can you tell me a little bit about your military service?
Sure, I'm an executive level leader in the Army. My job is a senior aircraft maintenance manager with a background in powertrain systems repair. I'm a graduate of all enlisted Army leadership schools to the highest level offered. Additionally, I am certified as a resiliency trainer, an equal opportunity representative, sexual harassment and assault program manager, and a workplace comprehensive fitness trainer. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Aviation Safety, as well as my Federal Communications Certification and my Federal Aviation Administrative Certificate. I have extensive experience in aviation maintenance, as well as non-destructive testing across the United States and the world, having moved 6 times and deployed 5 times to combat zones. My experience includes an aircraft mechanic, a technical inspector, an instructor, a production manager, and a senior program and personnel manager in both a flight service company and an aviation repair and overhaul company. I have maintenance experience on small Army vehicles, as well as 5 attack, observation, utility, and cargo helicopters. I'm responsible for the health, welfare, training, safety, and discipline of 120 employees, as well as the service and upkeep of $100 million worth of systems and equipment.
Now who wants to hire him? That was a little bit more understandable, right? So previously I showed you all of the acronyms he said, and he translated those for us. But if you ever come across those acronyms, they're right here up on this screen for you. It seems to make a little bit more sense when something is civilianized. And when service members leave the military, they do go through training to help with that process. Unfortunately, sometimes, and maybe Jim can attest to this, it's a box you check. At that time, you're not thinking about what happens on the other side necessarily. And so oftentimes you go to these trainings and you attend these events because it's something you have to do to get out of the military. And then you get out and you're like, oh no, I need help. And so sometimes there are people in place, much like what Jim is probably going to talk about later, who do those things for you, and they help you get set up with those resources. But unfortunately, had they just gone through that process before they got out, it would have made our jobs a lot easier. Unfortunately, and fortunately, I am here to help with that. And people just like me train people how to hire from the military community. So, struggles. Not only do service members struggle with the transition, but their families do as well. I mentioned earlier I have a senior in high school. I have 2 more children. I have a 13-year-old and a 4-year-old. He'll be 5 on Friday. As well as I'm a military spouse. And one of the things that military spouses struggle with is underemployment or gaps in our resume. We move regularly in a 20-year career because you can move every 2 years roughly, though we did do a stint where we had only 7 months at one duty location. If you move every 2 years, that's 10 moves in 20 years. And oftentimes you can have a hard time finding employment at that next duty location, or perhaps there isn't childcare available for you, or your service member deployed, and now you're having to juggle a new schedule on top of what life already looks like, okay? So those are some of the struggles that military spouses face. So when you get a resume in front of you and it says, gap, 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 there has to be a way that you're weeding out resumes. That's probably going to go in your no pile, unless you can look beyond the gap and see what experiences or cultural diversity they can bring to the table for you, okay? So let's see if I can find in my notes here. I want to give you a statistic. Military spouses trend below average in the workforce. 53% of military spouses participated in the labor market. But that compared to 76% of the general population, 13% of those military spouses that were attempting to participate in the labor market remained unemployed, and their unemployment is 3.5 times higher than the 2022 national average. That's something to note, that underemployment is important, but so is unemployment. I'm going to talk about underemployment a little bit before I go into my next slide, which was not planned, and I apologize if I go off on a tangent, just reel me back in, Lynn. Underemployment is a thing. I know several people who have master's degrees who answer telephones. I know several people who have a 4-year degree and can't find employment, not because of workforce shortage, because we certainly know that there are plenty of positions open for them, but for whatever reason their resumes aren't being picked up or they're not being looked at. So in the training that I have, one of the things we do is a resume exercise. We look at resumes of military spouses, we look at resumes of veterans, and we try to determine what would make us say yes to that resume, what would make us go to the next step, read the full resume, call them, reach out for an interview, things like that. So gaps in our resumes are huge. One of the reasons that military spouses volunteer is to fill the gaps in their resume. One of the things I talk about in training is volunteering. So helping to transition, why we're here today, we're talking about transitioning out of the military community. A very easy way to transition into any brand new community, and, as a service member or otherwise, is to find somewhere to volunteer. So not only does that help you become assimilated with a new location, it also helps to fill any resume gaps that you might have with professional experience. No? So why hire a veteran? That is one of the things we're here to discuss today. Going back to service members, they're known for having a strong work ethic. Hiring a veteran can result in the hiring of a dedicated employee who has developed valuable teamwork, leadership, and job skills. Veterans make good employees because of the strengths they bring to the workplace. So here, and I'm so sorry if you can't see, here we're going to talk about some of the reasons I think would be great to hire a veteran. They work well in a team. They are quick and creative problem solvers. You're welcome to take a picture of this slide if that's helpful to you. They have a strong work ethic. They're organized and disciplined, adaptable to changing situations, have a sense of duty, experience self-confidence. They're comfortable with honesty and integrity. They follow rules and schedules, and they have the ability to follow through even under difficult or stressful situations. I can attest to that. So consider interviewing a veteran next time you are looking to hire, which I think is why we're all here. We're all looking to hire or talk through those workforce strategies that everyone is finding as ways to resolve their issues. There are many ways to find candidates from within the military community. I'm going to give you a taste of that. Number one, you can host or participate in career fairs. Who in here already does that? Is there anyone who already participates in career fairs? So those are important because you can actually travel to a military installation. You can Google the top places to transition out of the military, but you can travel to a military installation and say, hey, I'm with a company in this location in Minnesota. We would love to have you come take a look at our facility. We would love to have you move to our community. Almost always, those are free. On a military installation, I can tell you Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, sees the highest number of people transition out of the military every year. That is a Marine Corps base. If you've ever been there, it might be understandable why. No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, so the important thing to remember, though, is career fairs in military installations, not only are they almost always free, you are going to be seeing people transitioning out of the military. That is who attends those, and sometimes military spouses, but typically it's service members. Okay, and then next, your company can start an intern or apprenticeship program. Does anyone in here already have an intern or apprenticeship program? Kaylin does. Anyone else? Okay, so intern and apprenticeship programs, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but if you start an apprenticeship program and you work with your local government or the state, oftentimes you can be reimbursed for your apprentice wages up to 75%. So look into that for your local county. I would probably start with the county. Okay, number 3, you can offer a referral program to your employees to help with your military hiring initiatives. How many people already have a hiring or a referral program for hiring? That's a pretty big one, right? So let's say for the month of November, November is Military Family Month. So maybe for the month of November, you say, hey, our referral bonus is going to double or go up by $100 or something like that to refer someone from the military community. And then lastly, post a job listing where service members will see them. Jody and I actually talked about this a little bit earlier, how important the network in the military community is. Anywhere we go, we have a network automatically, because I can reach out and say, hey, I'm a military spouse, I'm moving to this area, how many other military spouses are there? And I already have a network. So hiring from this community means you're also hiring part of our network. So that's an important piece as well. Right here in Minnesota, there are organizations that work with veterans and their families and help find employment for those individuals. You can start by connecting with the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development's Career Force. So I know that there are a few from Career Force downstairs today. Sam Cool is one of them. I told him I was going to throw his name out. Sam is here. He is not a leaver. I don't know, are you guys familiar with the term leaver? That is a local, correct me if I'm wrong, local veterans employment representative, I think. And what those people are going to do is they work with service members, but more importantly, they work with employees or employers looking to employ people from the military community. Anyway, Sam is not a leaver, but he is downstairs and can connect you with Career Force resources. I mentioned this already, but posting job listings where a service-connected population can find them is very important, and it is a key component to finding and hiring people from the military community. Locally, you can start with minnesotaworks.net. Who in here has used minnesotaworks.net? Is it a good resource for you?
So when we post our jobs, it goes out there automatically. There's not been a lot of applicants coming through.
Okay.
You know, there's just, applications are very far and few between.
I think that's everywhere, right? Unfortunately. So for minnesotaworks.net, it's great because it's free for you to post there, but it's also easy to find if you're searching for ways to find a job in Minnesota. It's an easy tool for me as a military spouse or my service member husband who is now transitioning out of the military and looking for a job. It's easy to find as well. So minnesotaworks.net, you can do a lot of things there. You can save resumes in there. You can post your job openings. You can find top candidates and have the system email you when a candidate that you're with the criteria that you're looking for goes through their website. So then nationally, there are some other resources that I'm going to touch on, and I'm going to go through them really quickly because I know we're over on time by quite a bit. So the Department of Labor, visit their official website. You can, as an employer, you click on this, and then it takes you straight to hiring a veteran. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, again, you can visit their website and then go to employers, and that will bring you to where you need to be. And then I'm not sure if you are familiar with Hire Vets. That's actually an acronym. Hire Vets is an acronym. I'm going to tell you what it means. Honoring Investments in Recruiting and Employing American Military Veterans Act of 2017. The very, very short version of what that means is it's a program that recognizes employer efforts to recruit, employ, and retain veterans. You can't see it very well, but you will get this in your slides when they send them out. You can't see it very well, but there are different categories of how to become a medallion member. Okay, and then one of the things that we talk about, which is important, and one of the things we discussed downstairs was workplace culture. So workplace culture is no different when you're talking about hiring from the military community. How can we support our service members now that they're in our doors? What can we do to better support them? So I do know of one company in here who already has an employee resource group for their veterans. Does anyone else have employee resource groups for their veterans? KLN does. So you can reach out to Scott if you have any questions about how that's going for them. They had a couple of events. So, but what that does, and we talked about this a little bit downstairs in different conversations, what that does is shows people that your workplace culture matters. And one of the things that they mentioned earlier was now job seekers get to choose. Be the reason they choose you. And having an employee resource group, I think, really helps with that. So what can you do today, going forward, when you leave here today, what can you do to start the process? You can identify the veterans you have on staff and start an ERG to support them. Or you can reach out to a company who does military inclusion training and have them come in and speak to you. There are different ways that you can do that. November, so tomorrow is the Navy's birthday. I don't know if you know that. Marine Corps birthday is in November, but so is Veterans Day, November 11th. So it's a great opportunity to start recognizing some of the service members, whether they are reservists, guardsmen, or veteran that you already have on staff. With that, I am done.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you so much. All right, I don't have a lot of questions, so I want you guys to take plenty of time to really lean into your answers. Don't feel like you've got to rush. All three of you, and I mentioned this before, have lived experiences in different roles transitioning from active service to civilian life. Can you share a specific challenge that you experienced and how an employer helped you work through that? We'll start with you, Jim.
Good afternoon again. I would say the biggest challenge, and it dovetails into what was presented, is that there's a realization, and I did go through transition assistance program as part of my exit from the military, but a lot of people don't. A lot of my peers didn't. I can do fine, and then they find themselves regretting that. So I did have a little help in this accord, but it's an understanding that you do have to reinvent yourself to some degree. And I think it's great that you are here and want to learn that, but I do think that to some degree we as veterans have a little bit of responsibility to ourselves to sit and figure out how we translate, if you will, our experiences into things that you can find useful. So there's a reinvention process. One, first, how to articulate those experiences that you have into something that might be helpful for a job that you're applying for. And then being able to effectively communicate that, and then basically go through that application process and be successful. I didn't necessarily gravitate going back into public sector after my service. I applied for one government job, and it's the one, it was the first one that called me back, and I thought if I find something with veterans, hey, I'm in, I'm all in. But I really did want to return to public sector and find something with it, or private sector, excuse me, and find a job in that nature. So I felt the need to work at that. And it's that process of reinvention, which not only means it's a translation of those skills, but you have to also divorce yourself from things that you glom onto and hold very dearly that nobody else cares about. You know, and I have things in my background that, boy, I'm really proud about it. You know, I might have even gotten an award from somebody at some point. But in my heart, I also know I can't bring that to the table because, one, no one cares. You know, unless you've had that military background and everything else. And how has my employer helped me? I think there's probably been some patience exhibited by Lynn and maybe other employees at Otter County to maybe offer me some grace here and there in terms of how I articulate myself and helping me work through some of those things. So that's my observation.
For me, it's a little bit different because I was still in high school when my dad transitioned out of the military. I grew up in San Diego, California, and luckily, like Melissa said, families move quite a bit when they're in the military. He was actually transferred between Miramar and Coronado, so I didn't have that constant moving that a lot of other military kids had. So when he was actually transferred to Minneapolis, that was a huge change going from San Diego, California to Minnesota. You know, just the weather and the culture and everything, it's very different. And so that was a big change. And then when he retired, trying to find that job, he was still in his 40s when he retired. And so trying to find that job afterwards was difficult. And I didn't have a whole lot to do with that. Like I said, I was still in high school, but I do remember that. And then that's what brought us up to this area. He ended up working for a lifelong friend of his, and he's been with him for about 20 years. And so that transition for me was a little bit more difficult, just, you know, culture shock going from big city San Diego to big city Minneapolis to 1,200 people in Elbow Lake, Minnesota. So that's what was the struggle for me. So.
Can I ask you one follow-up question?
Sure.
If you look at yourself as that child who went through such a big change, what were the things that you either recall or that you wish you had had as a member of a military family going through that? What were the things that were supportive and helpful?
Probably family was very supportive. The military family is very close-knit, I think, because it's such a small group of people, really. I mean, obviously there's thousands of people in the military, but it's not the same as what, you know, civilians, so to speak, go through. And so I think having that close-knit family, friends, having that support, those types of things are kind of what I didn't personally handle it very well. I was very upset at my father for making us move, but you know, we get through it. You know, you move on. It's just one of those things that you have to go through.
So for me, transition was a little bit different. So we're still in that process. My husband is still in Texas, like I mentioned. He will be active duty until January 31st. His first day as a civilian is February 1st. Initially, the plan was for him not to work out after he retired and for me to finally have my turn. I did work when he was coming up in ranks, when it was easier for me to work. And then unfortunately, when we moved from our first duty station, we got really lucky. We were at our first duty station almost 10 years. But that's because my husband was on a deployment cycle. So when you're deployed, you come home and you're on stabilization. So you get X number of months, 6 months, I think, on stabilization. And he would get orders for his next deployment during his stabilization. So we were stuck and we couldn't move, which was fine with me because Tennessee became like home to me. But when we left there, I had a really hard time. I was the manager of a loan company there. I ran my own branch. I was successful at it and I loved what I did. And when I moved, I really struggled to find a position where I wouldn't be underemployed and where I wouldn't be taken advantage of, thinking I was easier to hire for a lesser rate because I would just be moving on in a couple of years. And it wasn't a falsehood at that time. My husband was there to be an instructor, and so unfortunately that was a finite amount of time that we would be there. However, that being said, I still would have brought a lot of value to a position in that location. And so for me, my transition struggles have been from duty station to duty station. Going back to my network piece that I talked about before, I actually got the position that I'm in now because of my network, who hired me as a military spouse as well. And so she knew that I could bring value to this position, and the fact that I have lived this life for 20 years. My husband's retiring after 21 years. And so for me, the transition has been easier, but I can tell you my children have struggled. They have always identified as being Minnesotans, but they're finding that that is different in reality versus what it was in their brains. So I'm loving watching them grow into Minnesotans, but it's definitely been a cultural struggle. Our most recent duty location had 750,000 people in the city, and we also live in Elbow Lake, and that's 1,200 people. And my kids attend Ashby School, and I think the senior class has 19 people in it, so my daughter is graduating with 19 people versus the 460 in her previous class. So.
Okay, we're gonna have to talk later on because I'm a Wendell girl, and I think my husband and daughter went to a Boy Scout, Girl Scout meeting with you the other night. They're like, we met this family. They were so nice, and they just moved here from Texas, and they have 2 kids, and they go to Ashby. Okay, I digress. Thank you to each of you for sharing and being really vulnerable about sharing, because I think we frequently say, thank you for your service, thank you for your sacrifice, but there's a lot of layers there. And there's a lot of different degrees and things that are hard to quantify when you think about those sacrifices. So I'm touched. All right, Jody, you're at Northern Contours, and you completed something called the Insight course to become military ready. Can you share what you learned in completing that course and how you're putting those learnings into practice?
Okay, so we did go through the Insight training that was provided by Melissa through Cardinal Consulting Solutions. We have, at the time, we had 4 other locations besides our Minnesota. So we had all of our HR generalists go through this training. And I think for me, and I know Melissa touched on this through her presentation, for me, one of the biggest things is that military lingo. And what you learn from that, because it is so different. Like you heard in the video, you don't even know what they're saying, you know, and you can look at a resume or an application and they have all these abbreviations and the lingo, and you have no idea what they're talking about. This training helps you get through that. It helps you understand the lingo. It helps you know those different roles. So like I said earlier, my dad was a naval aviator. So he flew F-14s. You're all familiar with Top Gun, right? So he was a goose, if you will. So the Rio in the back, that's what he did. Those planes, the F-14s, they're no longer in commission, but they're worth about $50 million each one. So he's responsible for that plane when he's in it. He was also on an aircraft carrier. And at times, there's the one he was on called the Ranger was about 5,500 people. And it's basically a city on water. I mean, they have grocery stores, they have places where you can get your hair cut. They, you know, like it's literally a city on water. And so he was at times responsible for that aircraft carrier, which was worth about $1 billion at the time. And those 5,500 people. And so how do you translate those responsibilities, that information, into what you and I can understand when we're hiring those people? And so that is some of the information that the Insight program helps us to understand, helps us to get through. And so I think that's really important, and it was a wonderful program, and I recommend it to anyone.
Okay, my last question, and then if we will have time for those of you who are here to ask questions as well. What are your organizations doing respectively to connect veterans to work and work to veterans?
Well, we in the Veteran Service Office, cover a lot of different programs, and employment is one of them. But you know, there's also education, there's also disability, there's also you know, helping people that may need sustainable housing. There's so to some degree, I operate a little bit like a advocate and a little bit like a traffic cop, if you will, giving directions and trying to get people pointed towards the right resource. So relative to employment, one of the things I'm challenged to do is to have a catalog of jobs. You know, that's just something that we don't have the bandwidth given all the different things that we do have to do. So we rely heavily on DEED, which is something that was said before. And I work with Ladine Schillinger, and she's a vet too. And so we try to point them. She's a friendly face. She can speak the language. She can do all those different things. And and really help that veteran through. So we kind of give direction to that in terms of the help with the job search. Going through the TAPS program, which has been highlighted as very good for those that are on active duty and then transition out. If you go through that, one of the things they'll tell you is that LinkedIn, their I think it's their gold package. I forget the name of it exactly, but you get a free membership to that as a veteran. So it's a great resource. LinkedIn is a great way to get connected with people that are looking for work, and they also offer a benefit to veterans to do it, and military spouses too. So if you, those are a couple things that I would highlight. I'd also highlight some different things like in terms of job training. Many veterans, when they sign up, are eligible to some form of a GI Bill that they have. Oftentimes they don't necessarily remember what they have left, what they might have used. So we can get them pointed in the direction to that. Veterans that may have a service-connected disability. Maybe that impacts what it is that they can do at work, okay? The VA offers a program called vocational rehabilitation. That's what they used to call it. Now it's a program, VRE. And basically it helps that person receive some training at cost to the VA to help compensate for whatever disability that has. And it's a back-to-work program. It's not just money in their pocket. It's with an aim. They offer career counseling. So many veterans that go through that, they build like a life coach almost for years after they exit the program. So I guess those are really some of the primary things that we try to highlight for our veterans and get them pointed in the right direction. For others, sometimes if they're transitioning, maybe they need help with sustainable housing. We can help them through an association called MACV. They'll pay first month's rent, deposit on a apartment if necessarily, help them get established. They'll also, through their education counselors, they may offer assistance with things like helping pay for internet service, give the veterans some gas cards so that they can actually drive to job interviews and maybe help bite off some of the cost of the initial job search and maybe getting started. So like I said, I'm a bit more of a traffic cop and an advocate, and that's where we try to point our folks to.
For me, the short and quick and easy answer is just hire veterans. As a military, somebody with a military background, I think highly of military personnel. And so for me, when I get a resume that has military, they go on the top of my pile. They don't automatically go in the no, regardless of what is on their resume or application, because to me, I know what that means. And so I know the sacrifice, I know the responsibility that they have to go through, the training, the education, the leadership they have. And so to me, those are very good qualities to have in employees. And so they go on the top of the pile. And I definitely try to encourage. I unfortunately don't get to make the ultimate decision on who we hire, but I definitely try and push our military veterans if we get an application with that. And so to me, the easy answer is just hire them.
Of course, we all know I'm educating the civilian workforce. That's what I do. That's what I'm paid to do. But also with CCS, because we are both military spouses and we work in the military realm, if you will, we do oftentimes get people that come to us and say, hey, I know someone who's a veteran who's looking for work. Well, first we send them to a county VSO or something like that, career force. But if I have a company that I've worked with, I have 2 in the room right now, if I have a company that I've worked with to help them set up their military inclusion processes, I'm going to say, hey, apply at KLN. They're ready for you. Apply at Northern Contours. They're ready to accept you, and they're looking to support you in their workforce. So we don't get paid for that. I just send them to where I think would be great for them. Whoever is in our network, I know I keep talking about that, but it's important. Whoever is in our network to kind of push them to, but then more importantly, I just want to help because we've been through the transition, or I'm in it right now, and I want to help someone transition successfully out of the military. And so if I know how to find a resource, I'm going to give that to them.
All right, questions?
I guess I got one question.
All right.
What would you say is more difficult for a veteran? Is it actually finding the job, or is it moving to the private sector and finding the right culture? Because for me, you look at all the military, the credentials that are shown with each, the stress, the hardworking, the discipline. To me, those are right at the top for hiring people. So I find it awfully difficult that a veteran can't find a job with those type of credentials. So does that make sense? Is it more difficult to actually find a job or adjust to the...
Well, it's
or equally?
It's equal parts. It's equal parts. But I would say the looking for work, I mean, because, I had a different job every few years. So to some degree, I was a bit challenged into narrowing things down to like, what do I really want to try to focus on? Like, what are the spheres within the things that I think I do well and I enjoy? Is it that I want to try to apply for? And that was a bit of a process because, like I said, I'm to some degree, you get told what your next job's going to be, so now you've got this whole thing where you have to, well, out of those things I've been told to do for the last several years, I got to focus in on those things that I really like and kind of narrow that down and again, kind of invent what I am to a workforce. Beyond that, yes, there is that transition, and while on the outside it would be, yeah, you were active, but you were guard and everything else that should have been easy. It wasn't necessarily, because Monday through Friday, my peer group of friends, my peer groups of my wife's friends, they're all military, and that's what we talk. That's our experience, and everything else. Even though we live like in Bismarck or West Fargo or whatever, that is our experience. So yes, adapting to those differences in a work environment can be somewhat challenging, and I don't know necessarily how to best go over that, but I think the big thing is that a veteran is looking to be part of a team. They like a team environment. I think that a veteran cares very much. They've got a degree of morals that, like, is leadership effectively doing their jobs, or my peers effectively doing their jobs. I think those are the things that are important to help them feel at home in a work environment. And there were a few things that had been mentioned in the presentation. I want to mention one other thing just in terms of a benefit you get. A lot of us have moved a lot. We want to be part of a community. And when you're talking about small town Minnesota and everything, who doesn't want someone that wants to be invested in the community, be active in their church, all those different things. So I'd highlight that as also something as a benefit. Did that answer?
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, and kind of going off of that too a little bit, one of the things that Jim mentioned was living the life every day, right? So every day, like, we have friends over, all we talk about is the military. I wish I were kidding, but I am not. That it's 24 hours a day. My husband doesn't want to touch another helicopter again in his life, but if people come over, that's what we talk about. We talk about helicopters. Like, it's just the thing. So, but more importantly, what Jim said at the beginning was trying to figure out what you want to do when you grow up, right? My husband has a degree in history and has been in the aviation world for 20 years and doesn't want to touch another helicopter. So I think part of that is it's finding a job where you believe that you fit. Does that make sense? But then more importantly, you feel supported in that new role. And I think that is also, I mean, both. Like Jim said, it's both. It's a little bit of both, I think, because my husband is actually looking for work right now, and when he goes to apply for these different positions, he's like, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I don't want to do that. You know, or maybe that's too much because everyone doesn't want a leadership role. You know what I mean? When they leave the military. Ooh.
And I looked at everything like, I could do that.
Right. Oh, my husband's the same way. I'm definitely qualified to do that.
I'm like,
Did you have a question here?
Yeah. So spending the last 15 years or so in hiring, the companies that I've worked for are fully, I think they fully understand the attributes that the military veterans bring to our workforce. But one of the biggest challenges I see when we look through resumes, I've seen thousands of resumes in my lifetime here, and one of the things we see is verbiage that doesn't truly explain to us what they bring to our civilian company, right? And so what kind of resources are available to them in creating their resume and I guess preparing them to answer the questions on, I don't understand that, what does that mean to us and why would you be a good fit? So what resources are available to them?
So I can take it initially, but I'm sure Jim has a ton of resources. ONET is a big one when you go through the Transition Assistant Program. They say you can go to ONET, and as an employer, you can as well. So you can type in your MOS, in the Army it's MOS. It's the Military Occupational Code. That's what I'm going to say it is. It's in my workbook, I should know. Oh yeah, specialty, well, yes. Anyways, thank you. So you can type that in, and then ONET says, hey, this is what you're qualified to do, or this is what you did. And so when writing your resume, you can pull those pieces off of there and write a more civilianized resume because that resource is there for you, but that I'm sure Jim has a ton of other.
yeah, in the transition program that I mentioned, they give you a lot of this information, and I'd have to kind of go back and look through some of it, but you know, a lot of things that we gave, we actually had a presentation from some probably much like yourself that had been on hiring boards and everything like that. You know, right in the book, it'll talk about, you know, by echelon. Well, a company means one thing to me, means something different to you. So they'll work them through, but some of those language differences are in terms of that, which helps them write that. But there's also a host of different resources out there in terms of translating different experiences into civilian terms or terms that make sense on the outside. So you just almost got to Google search it, quite honestly, and you can find it. It's oftentimes it's the willingness of the person to go through and do some of those things.
Well, and what we're seeing more and more too, I probably don't know that, is if you have a resume you're interested in and you don't understand something on it, have someone call them and say, hey, we'd love to know more information about this.
I have business cards here too, so feel free to grab one and you can call me and say, Jim, translate this to me.
Jim has business cards, and he wants to talk to you. We're cutting into break time, but I want to thank our panelists with a round of applause. Huge thanks. Thank you so much.